appreciate those thoughts. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to observe before I start my questions that I'm a little disappointed that we don't have more public here at this hearing and that we don't have more members at this hearing, because given that the conventional wisdom is that there is the potential for a war over Taiwan in the future, and given the economic implications of Taiwan for the United States, this is a topic that we all really ought to be concerned about and we ought to be paying attention to. So I especially appreciate our witnesses for your comments today, and I hope that we can share what we hear today with other members of the committee, because clearly there is a lot at stake and we better start paying more attention to what's going on. So I think this question is for you, Dr. Doshi. From March of 2022 to January of 25, the United States built a sanctions coalition that denied Russia critical technologies and billions in revenue for the war in Ukraine. I think we're going to need that same toolkit if we're going to deter China from acting against Taiwan and to respond if they cross the line. But as I understand, currently we don't have the authority, the United States doesn't have the authority to respond to PRC gray zone aggression with sanctions. So as Congress thinks about creating that authority, what triggers and measures would you recommend it include, and how should we coordinate with allies in the deployment of such tools?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Ranking Member Shaheen. Let me just begin by saying it's true. Right now, there are only a handful of executive orders under IEPA, essentially, that allow the United States to declare sanctions on China related to Xinjiang, Hong Kong, human rights, cyber, and other issues, but none related to Taiwan. And so as a direct result, in a gray zone contingency, especially a crisis, you'd have to create an authority. The executive branch would have to issue an executive order to be able to levy sanctions on a Chinese target. And so the targeting legislation that you've proposed is very helpful, but we also need the authority to follow through. Congress could take the lead in making sure that that authority exists, as they've done in other cases, and that would be quite helpful, I think, to the executive branch. I think a second point to answer your question directly about priorities, there's going to be an escalation ladder that's needed. For different kinds of provocations in the Strait, we should have different kinds of responses. We may not wish to make those public, they may be internal, but that kind of targeting work needs to be done in advance, and we need to know now what the costs will be for the United States so we can mitigate them. That kind of work is just essential and common sense. And finally, I'd like to just add one other point about coordination with allies. Our allies will be reluctant to do some of this. They understand that there'll be economic costs for them as well. One thing that's going to be critical in getting them to work with us is to help them understand that when they speak out in favor of Taiwan, when they take these kinds of stands, we're with them. And that's why, as Chairman Risch, you mentioned earlier in your opening, the problem that we're facing with the punishment of Japan by China for statements by the Prime Minister is concerning. The United States has to stand with Japan, because if we don't, no other country will stand with Taiwan.
Well, thank you. I don't know if either of our other witnesses want to add anything with respect to sanctions. If not, let me follow up on the comments that the chairman mentioned about Japan, and just ask you, we haven't seen the administration voice support for Japan following Prime Minister Takaichi's comments that she made in support of Taiwan, where the Chinese basically threatened to behead the Prime Minister because of those comments. So characterize, if you could, the Trump administration's coordination with our allies and partners on Taiwan and China policies.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Shaheen. I'd like to see more coordination. I think the Trump administration could coordinate even more intensely, particularly on Taiwan and even on economic matters as well, although that's a separate issue. In particular, right now, we might see China escalate beyond the rhetorical to the economic. And imagine if China starts taking economic steps against Japan. What we need is some kind of Article 5-like economic mechanism to collectively push back when China does that. We don't have that kind of mechanism right now. We tried to create it when I was in the Biden administration. We didn't succeed. But it is possible, and I think with congressional support, we could get there. So right now, I'd say there's been a few statements of support for Japan from the Trump administration, but we need a lot more given the scope of what Japan is facing. I will end with this. I did read a report, I have to verify it, that the Typhoon missile system might have been withdrawn from Japan around the same time that essentially China was pushing Japan. I think that's the wrong kind of signal, even if it's a regularly scheduled rotation.
Well, thank you for mentioning the report. I just happen to have a copy here, so hopefully people will take a look at it because it does raise some troubling questions about our policies with respect to the ability to continue to compete with China. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Dr. Doshi, you mentioned in your statements just now military matters related to Taiwan, capabilities, planning, and that sort of thing. It's appropriate to raise in this, but this committee is focused on other things. And I got to be careful what I say here. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I'm a senior Republican on the Intelligence Committee, though not chairman, but senior. There's a lot more to that, and as you mentioned, it's not appropriate for public dissemination, and we hope it stays that way. But I just want the record to be clear that there's a lot more to this when it comes to the military preparedness and the military planning regarding Taiwan-China conflict. With that, that's about all I can say about it. So